Thanks for joining the webinar today. My name is Eileen Mendoza. I'm the Director of Customer Experience here at Iris VR, and today we'll be talking about how to use 360 panoramas along with mobile VR technology. Before we keep going, just some general housekeeping items. If you have any issues hearing me or seeing anything, please ask a question or raise your hand via Zoom. I will be able to see that on my end and we can adjust any settings necessary. We'll also be hosting a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So any questions that come along as I present the slides, please submit them. I will also be able to see those and I will answer them all at the end of the webinar. Awesome, so let's get started. So just a quick recap before we move forward. Today's webinar, as I mentioned, is focused on creating 360 captures and panoramas, in particular for use with our Iris VR Scope app, which I'll also describe in detail. Some of the goals for this webinar is by the end of it, you'll leave with a clear understanding what are the benefits of using 360 panoramas, what are some of the common workflows that you'll be able to employ for creating these images, and of course, how to apply panoramas in your daily projects in different phases of work. Our next webinar, if you're interested in participating, will be specifically focused on Revit models. So things related to optimizing your files for VR, some tips and tricks that we've learned in the process. If you are attending the webinar now, you will receive an invitation to your inbox afterwards with the details. All right, so let's get started with the basics. What is a 360 panorama? You might have heard this in various ways. Sometimes it's called a 360 capture, sometimes it's called a pano for short, and sometimes it'll be called 360 panorama. But in general, what they're referring to is a point within a 3D model that has been rendered out in what is considered a static 360-degree view. This means that anything that is textures, materials, lighting that have been applied to the model will be rendered out in that process to create a photorealistic experience in that 360 degree. I always like to think of them as stepping into a 360 bubble where you can see all around you. What's important to remember about a 360 panorama is that in essence, in its exported format, it is really a flat JPEG. And so I'll show you guys what that looks like next. So this is what you can expect to see when you first render that out. This is a 12:1 stereocubic panorama export. And so I'll show you what the magic of these images are. So even though it looks like they're similar, essentially these 12 small rectangles, 6 of them represent what is your left eye, and 6 of them represent what would be your right eye. When you load that panorama onto the Scope app will merge these two images together. And as you can see from the row in the bottom, you have the original one. And so I color-coded the left eye versus right eye, and at the end, you'll see the merged images. You won't actually see that. The ability of those two images to merge is actually what creates depth and accuracy for your site. But just to give you some insight, it's actually a pretty cool, magical process that goes on behind the scenes. And so, of course, why should we use 360 panoramas versus traditional 2D images? There's a ton of reasons. I wanted to highlight 4 of them as we go forward. One of them is the ability to win projects. When you have a traditional 2D rendering that is, let's say, an 11:17 or a 24:36 image that has been printed out, you are sort of focused on one particular view. And you are forcing the person that you are presenting to only see that one particular segment of your project. But they might be interested in seeing something that perhaps you weren't aware of. So having another method to communicate is a great way to win projects because it begins to build trust and you're able to convey your intent in a photorealistic way. Next, the images are really inexpensive to create. Typically, most firms have a license to one of the software packages that I'll mention for creating the images. And you are probably familiar with setting this up. So training is typically very limited, and it's just a matter of adding your textures and hitting render. Another benefit is that 360 panoramas use mobile VR. Mobile VR, which I'll touch upon later on as well, is very light. You're talking about the Gear VR, the Google Cardboard, the Daydream, and they're really easy to carry. So it's a very just practical way to use VR. And of course, as I mentioned in the beginning in winning projects, really being able to impress your clients by showing them something that they weren't expecting. Most clients already expect to see a flat 2D rendering, but giving them something that they can take home and view on their phones, share with other members of their team, or even just brag about how cool the firm that they're working with is always going to be a big win. So at Iris VR, because we're, of course, always exploring all the different ways that virtual reality can be a powerful tool for you, we've created an app called Scope Pro. And the way that Scope works is it essentially allows you to upload these 360 panoramas onto an online library. And that online library can then be synced to your phone and shared with others that they can see those images via mobile headsets. With Scope, you'll have an online library that allows you to do 360 views of the panos. You'll have a library for image management. Like I said, you'll be able to share these images, and something that we pride ourselves a lot is our app will always provide 60 frames per second. This is important because it means that your image will load very smoothly and will not cause anything that will be motion sickness inducing to your client or whoever you're presenting to. Some of the formats that we support are the 12:1 stereo cubic panoramas, also 2x6 stereo cubic, monospherical, and stereospherical. These are all different ways that different softwares will export and give you settings for, and I'll review those in further detail as well in our upcoming slides. And so the components that you'll need always whenever you're using mobile VR is, one, you will have to have a panorama in one of the formats that we mentioned. You will need to have a smartphone and the smartphone with the Scope app installed, and then a mobile headset. There's a few different variations for the types of smartphones that you can use in the mobile headsets, which I'll show you next as well. So these are the leading combinations of smartphones and mobile headsets. If you are using an iPhone, right now what we recommend pairing your iPhone with is the Google Cardboard. Google Cardboards are really inexpensive. You can customize them for your company brand or an event brand. And what's great about them is that regardless whether you have a very large phone or the smaller iPhone, they will fit well. And they're also lightweight and easy to give out. If you have a Google Pixel, you're able to use the Google Daydream. The Google Daydream is really nice. It's really comfortable to use. Of course, the downfall here is that you do have to have a Google Pixel phone, which is not as common of a phone. If you're using an Android device, you do have actually two different options. You can use the Android device with the Google Cardboard as well, because it'll fit in, or you can pair it with the Gear VR. One thing that's important, if you have an Android device, there's a few things that you need to check. As you can see at the top, I mentioned that any phone that you choose to use, it needs to have an accelerometer. The accelerometer is the component inside the phone that allows to track movement across the phone. There are certain models of Androids that are not as powerful. They're older models and they don't have this component, and so they simply just won't work with mobile VR. Also, because there are different sizes of Android devices, there are also different sizes of Gear VRs. So make sure before you purchase the Gear VR headset that it is compatible with the version of Android phone that you have. Last but not least, one more thing to mention, if you're interested in purchasing a Google Cardboard, we personally are big fans of imcardboard.com. We print all of our cardboards through them. They're high quality, they're really great. If you need to buy a handful of them, they can also customize them. And whenever you're checking out, if you use the code irisvr.com, you'll get an extra 10% off discount from your total purchase. So that's always a win there. Great. So next we're going to be moving into covering the more specific steps for creating panoramas with different software engines. So many of you are using Revit. Revit is great. Recently, V-Ray released the first commercial release of their plugin for Revit, and it's really simple and easy to use. I'll quickly go over some of the steps, but at the bottom of the screen, as you can see, there is a step-by-step guide that I highly recommend using if you haven't rendered out using V-Ray with Revit before. It's very simple to use and will be really easy. So essentially, if you're using V-Ray with Revit, you want to make sure that you have the V-Ray tab open. From there, you will have a few settings that we recommend. So one of them is making sure that you set your resolution to be 1536 by 1536. That'll render it out at the right aspect ratio. Next, you want to set your exposure value. That will essentially mean it's affecting the brightness or the darkness of the image. We typically recommend starting at 14, but you might want to do, depending the content that you're rendering out, you want to maybe do one at 14 first as a draft, and then go back and adjust it to either a higher value or a lower value, depending on how you want the image quality to appear. Next, once you open up the settings menu, you're going to want to change that camera to be a VR stereo camera, which is what will allow you to export that 12:1 image that I showed at the beginning. That will have 6 images for your left eye and 6 images for your right eye. Once you have all those things in place, you can hit the teapot, which you'll see at the top. The teapot just means that it's going to render out that setting. If you're not quite ready or you're unsure about the settings, we recommend rendering a draft quality first. The draft quality means that it will render much faster. It will be, it implies a draft quality, but it'll give you a quick preview if there's any adjustments that you need to make. Once again, I highly encourage everyone to check out the adding materials with V-Ray guide. That link is there. We'll send that link afterwards as well. It's a really comprehensive step-by-step guide to using it. And last but not least, if your office is doing a lot of rendering, we suggest exploring V-Ray's Swarm. This allows you to leverage your entire company's computing power for rendering, which means that it will, really cut down the rendering time from, let's say an hour or two to really a handful of minutes, depending on the power of your computers. V-Ray also has a integration for Sketchup that has recently been updated to allow you to do mobile VR exports. The steps are very similar. I'll quickly review them as well. You want to make sure that you have the V-Ray extension installed. Once you click on that, you can see from the top, you'll go into V-Ray Render and Options, and you want to open the Asset Editor. From there, the next thing you'll do is click on the type of camera, and in this scenario, you want to set up VR Cube Map, turn on stereo. That's what will render out with the depth as well. You'll want to set your image width and height ratio to 1536. If you just set one of them to 1536, it'll automatically populate the correct size for the other one, so that's very helpful. And the last one is you'll want to make sure that your output is side by side. That will guarantee that those images come out in that row as I showed before. And just like with Revit, you can always count on that teapot to mean that it's going to render it out. It will give you the option once you click on the teapot to see a draft quality, which once again, I always recommend, because if you catch something that is not appearing the way that you'd like for it to appear, you can always go back and edit it rather than waiting till the final image has been rendered to see it. Right. V-Ray also has an integration for Rhino. So if you are a Rhino user, you might already be experienced with this. But the first thing you'll want to do is make sure that you have set your renderer in the Rhino menu to be V-Ray default. Rhino automatically defaults to their own rendering engine, which is powerful for some things, but it's not one that we recommend necessarily for doing stereoscopic images. Once you've switched over to the V-Ray, you can then go to Render, Current Renderer menu, and open the V-Ray Asset Editor. Once again, it's same steps whether you're using Revit, Sketchup, or Rhino. You'll see here that the steps repeat. You'll want to set up your type of camera, which would once again be VR Cube Map. You want to make sure that stereo is on. You want to set the image height to 1536, and once again that width will automatically set to the correct aspect ratio. You'll want to set your output to be the side-by-side, which will allow for that longer 12:1 image. And last but not least, click that teapot and make sure that you have draft so you can check it out first. And then once your draft is good, make sure to change that to final, and that'll take a little longer, but it'll render it out perfectly. Great. A lot of our users are currently using Lumion as well for a lot of visualizations. The great news is that Lumion also lets you export VR panoramas in just a handful of steps. So the first thing you'll want to do is set up your scene, and then once that scene is set up, you'll want to set the panorama functions, as you can see highlighted in that first image. Then you'll want to set up the viewpoint that you want this panorama to be set. Clicking that camera icon will take you to the spot. You can adjust it. You can have a number of them, or you can just start with one. Once you have that viewpoint set, you'll then want to click on VR Panorama to open the export options. And so once those export options are open, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, you'll want to be, you can pick once again the production quality. We're highlighting here production because that would be final, but I always recommend, as I've said before, doing a draft to make sure that you have everything set up correctly. You do want to have stereoscopic on. And then in terms of setting a target device, you can do either or. You can set up a generic VR device. We personally like setting a VR Oculus. The image that you'll get will work regardless on any device that you've uploaded once it's into scope, but the Oculus allows you to do that stereoscopic image. Next is Autodesk 360. This is another great way to create panoramas, and something that you likely already have installed. If you are within Revit, you'll want to go to the View tab, and then from there you'll click Render in the Cloud. Make sure that it will ask you as to what view you would like to set, and there you'll also want to see, as is in the top image, you'll want to set up the output type to be stereo panorama, render quality. Once again, you can alternate between draft and final. And once you have those three things set up, you can start, click render. It will give you an estimate of how long it will take. So for example, this panorama that we were testing, it's set around 10 minutes or less. So it's always good to also click on email me when it's complete, so that you don't have to kind of monitor it right there. Once it's complete, you will get a notification, as you can see in number 4, the bottom one, that it's ready. We suggest just downloading that. So on the download stereo panel for Gear VR, once again, that'll export out that JPEG image, which you can then upload onto the Scope app. One that is not necessarily a software workflow, but that we also encourage our users to explore is the Ricoh Theta. So you might have heard about this camera, but it looks like a very small control. And it essentially is a 360 photo capture tool. The Ricoh Theta, you can connect it to your phone. You can put it on a tripod. You can take it to a job site. And what it'll do is that camera that you can see in the very first image, it will do within seconds a full 360 scan of the space, and it will turn it into an image that can be loaded onto Scope. This is a really good tool to have if you are constantly visiting sites that are in progress. It's a way you can set the tripod and the Ricoh Theta in the same spot, visit after visit, and be able to see those images. One clarification that I would like to mention here is we often get the question, which is, oh, my iPhone says that it does panoramas. Why can't I use that panorama? Or how come that doesn't load on the Scope app? The panoramas that are currently created by an iPhone are pretty much just east to west. It's one straight bar. However, the Ricoh Theta also captures the north and the south poles. So it really is a 360 capture tool. You can think about the iPhone panorama as almost being a orange who's had its top and bottom sliced, and you just have that middle wedge. It's missing information above it and below it, and so it can't really create a 360 image, even though those are great for other purposes as well. And so the last workflow tool that I'll show, one that we are very excited at Iris VR, is for any of our users that are currently using Prospect. We have a really quick and easy way to create 360 captures directly from your model. The way this works is once your file has been uploaded into Prospect and converted into a VR experience, as you are navigating the space, you can use the in-VR menu, which is the first image that you see, toggle on the 360 capture, and then from there you can pull the trigger to take a snapshot, and it will take a full 360 stereoscopic image of that environment that you're in. The process takes a handful of seconds. It will get saved to your desktop, and then you can upload it onto the Scope app for viewing. So we are working very hard to make sure that the render time needed is less and less. So if you do have Prospect and your textures and everything are set up, you can have a ton of panoramas made within seconds. I have created a library for you to be able to see that. So if you have the Scope app installed on your phone, you can simply go to Shared with Me, and you can enter the code KVDH4Z. And that is a sample panel set that I've created for this webinar that will show you what the panels look like when they are created from within Prospect. All right. So of course, the next question is, my image is ready. What's next? How do I get rolling and seeing this into virtual reality? So I'll walk you next through the steps on how to get up and running. The first thing you'll do is, if you have the Scope app already installed, or if you have your username, you can log into the Iris VR folder, and you can drag and drop these panoramas into the library. As you can see from the image, it's pretty much as simple as creating a pano set, dragging and dropping, uploading, and those images will be right there. Most of the time, this step takes just a handful of seconds. You might spend more time figuring out what folder you saved your panoramas to than actually uploading the images onto the online library. Once you have the images uploaded, there's a few features that we have built in. One is the ability to do a 360 preview of that image. So as you can remember from the beginning, already in this step, you are seeing that very long, thin image that I had shown with the 12 squares that were all different being reconciled on your screen for this preview. This is also a great way, if you are making a presentation, you can always expand this on your screen and quickly show the client a preview before handing them the headset. Next, you'll want to sync this with your phone. So it's simply a matter of opening the Scope app on your phone. If you're using an iPhone, you would download the app from the iPhone App Store. If you are using an Android phone, you could then go to the Google Play Store and download the app there. You can simply sign into your account, and your phone will automatically know which panos have been uploaded to your online account. And then you can there click on the image that you want to download, or if you want to download the entire pano set. The moment that you rotate your phone, it will already know that you are moving into virtual reality mode. And the next step that this image doesn't show is simply just placing the phone into the Google Cardboard or the Gear VR to proceed in seeing that image in virtual reality. Once you've loaded all the panos into VR and you have your phone into the headset, we've created a really easy to use menu that allows you to switch between both panorama sets and images. The way to access this menu is every headset has a button at the top or a toggle. If you're using a Google Cardboard, it'll just look like the silver button. It's made out of cardboard, so it's the silver button cardboard. And if you're using the Gear VR, you'll want to tap it on the side. That will populate that image, and then tapping it one more time will allow you to jump in between images. So it's a really easy way to create a narrative for the story that you're sharing with your customer. Now, oftentimes you will be having a meeting that is not at the office, or simply you just want to share images with someone in between projects or just as progress sets. So we've developed a feature that allows you to share images with others. And the steps are pretty easy. Once you have your Pano library created on the online library, you can click on the share icon, which you'll see just in a second coming up again. That icon at the very top, it will ask you if you're interested in generating a share code, and then it will create a 6-digit share code. That can be sent to your client. They don't have to log into the account. They don't have to make a username. They simply just have to download the app. They can add your share code, and then they will have access to all of those images within the Pano set. And if at any moment you want to update the images in those Pano sets, from your side, you can go in, swap out any images, and they will automatically get that notification. Of course, there are times where after you have shared a Pano set, you don't necessarily want that individual to hold on to them forever. Perhaps you were presenting for a project proposal or something that was confidential. From the online scope library, you will be able to revoke access at any time and disable that share code. So next, I thought it'd also be fun to show some of the ways that our customers are using this in their professional practices. So the first example is a First and Molt. They are a scope user. And so what they have been doing is on their website, they've created a series of panos and content that can be essentially seen through their website. And so what they've done is created a few steps. So as you can see here on the right, they suggest anyone that visits their website to download the Scope app, press the large plus button, enter that code, which you're more than welcome to enter that code if you'd like to see some of their work, and then put it into the, I guess, cardboard, or they call it glasses or headset, so either the cardboard or the Gear VR headset, whichever one you have available to you. And this is a great way to also get new business. If you have this on your website and you have either potential new clients that come, what a great and easy way to have them see your work even before having reached out to you for any additional information. So really easy to use. And once again, if at any moment they wanted to take this down, they could simply just deactivate that code and the other users wouldn't be able to see it anymore. We've also seen mobile VR and Scope be really popular for customers when they are having events, right? And so this is one example of Mortensen Construction that had a groundbreaking ceremony in Chicago for the Harris Public Policy new building that will be out in, I think, built over the next few years. And so they had a groundbreaking ceremony where, as I mentioned before, you can customize the Google Cardboard. So they customized it with the school logos, with the school colors, with the company's logo. And then they had a table where anyone that attended the event could simply pick up a cardboard, use one of those share codes on their phone, and be able to see a preview of what the future building would look like. So it definitely added an element of excitement beyond putting that shovel into the ground and saying that, it was a groundbreaking. And of course, all the attendees were able to take home a Google Cardboard, share that vision with their friends, with others, and just create a lot of excitement. If you're interested in doing this for any of your events, the steps for doing it are really straightforward. You would just simply need to have the mobile headset, whichever one you choose. In this case, it's the Google Cardboard. You would need to have, the individuals have a smartphone and, of course, download the Scope app, but they would need to register. Your panoramas loaded onto a pano set. And then, of course, we recommend having enough cardboards for all of your attendees, but we've also seen events where they just have a handful of cardboards being shared throughout the event. Great, and last but not least, this is a request that we get often, which is how do I use Scope if I'm presenting to a client? So there's two different ways depending on which headset and which phone you are using. I'll start with the Android phones. So if you're using an Android phone, you want to have the Scope app installed. You'll want to have the Gear VR or a Google Cardboard since the Android phone works with both. But you will want to pair your Android with a Comcast device that is connected to a large TV or monitor. The Comcast device, I believe right now on Amazon, is really inexpensive. You can get it for about $20, $30. They often have them on sale. And then, of course, have your panoramas loaded. And as you can see from the image, what that does is it will mirror anything that's on the phone onto the screen so that while the user has the headset on, anyone else in the room can also engage with what they are seeing, point at things, and have a conversation about it. If you are using an iPhone device, it is a very similar process. You, of course, want to have your headset. In this case, it would be a Google Cardboard, your smartphone with the Scope app. The difference here is that instead of having the Google Chromecast, you would have an Apple TV. The Apple TV is slightly more expensive than the Chromecast because it does have a lot more functionality. I think they usually run for about $100. Sometimes they have them less, especially during holiday sales. But they really are great assets, and so you can do so much more with them. And then having your panoramas set loaded. All right, so before we continue onto our Q&A question, just a quick recap of some of the things covered today. As we discussed, we spent all of our time talking about 360 captures and panoramas, how to make these images for use with the Iris VR Scope app. I hope by now you've gotten some ideas for how 360 panoramas can benefit your own work and how other users are applying that technology. And of course, previews into the common workflows for creating of these 360 images. Great, so before we move on into questions, just 3 things to mention. Anytime that you're interested in learning more, any tips, tricks, and tutorials, please head over to help.irisvr.com. We have a ton of knowledge posted there, step-by-step guides, as well as our blog.irisvr.com. On the blog, you are able to see, we always feature how different companies are using the software, ways that they've benefited from it. And whenever you're ready to dive in to mobile VR, we do have a free 45-day trial of Iris VR Scope that you can access from our website. It is a no commitment trial, no need to have a credit card or anything signed up. You simply just add your name, your email, and you'll have access for the next 45 days. As I mentioned at the very beginning, our next webinar will be talking about Revit models and how to optimize them for viewing in virtual reality. So that will be a more in-depth and advanced user webinar than the ones we've had in the past. And if you missed it at the very beginning, I made a special Pano set to share with all of you to show you what these images created out of prospects can look like. If you are interested while we're still on the webinar or even afterwards, please feel free to download the Scope app. Tap on that plus sign and then add the code KVDH4Z, and that'll automatically show you additional sample content created from models in Revit, models in V-Ray, Sketchup models, and also one from GeoPipe that is really cool. It's a overview of, I believe, the city of New York. Great, and so I will shift over to questions. Just give me 1 second so that I can read through and get answers for you. All right, so the first question that we've received is a great one. Thanks, Karen, for submitting this. It says, is there a way to create a customized share code, such as Smith1 ? At the moment, there isn't a way to generate that. The reason why we have them auto-generated is right now we want to make sure that no two individuals have the same share code, and that in a way you somehow end up crossing wires with someone, and that's why they're auto-generated. But I think that is a great feature request, and I will definitely make sure to mention that to our web team, who is kind of spearheading all the technology behind our scope app. So thank you for asking that. That's a great question. Next question that I have here, this is from Richard. It says, can panoramas be viewed with an HTC Vive or Oculus Rift? So at the moment, no. It's not possible to view panoramas with the HTC Vive or Oculus Rift, really because they're two very different technologies. The Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive are really intended for you to use them in conjunction with a 3D file. You have the controllers that allow you to point and navigate, and so they're just two very different technologies. So at least for right now, maybe in future iterations of the Vive or the Oculus Rift, some of these technologies will come together and you'll be able to see either one in any of the headsets. All right, let me click on this one more time. All right, so we have an anonymous viewer that asked, how many panoramas am I limited to uploading? So the great thing with Scope is we really have no limit to the number of panoramas that you can upload. You can create an unlimited number of pano sets. And so you can have a pano set that has 1,000 different panos. You can have 100 different pano sets with 3 panos each. We really leave that up to you. The online library is just meant to allow you to manage your images in any way that you want. You can always delete panoramas that have been added, but in terms of limit, there is no limit whatsoever. All right, let's see. The other question that I have is, all right, so here, this is also from Anonymous. How much does it cost to customize Google Cardboard? This is a great question. I actually get this quite a bit. So the great thing about Google Cardboards and why we love them so much is because they're really inexpensive to customize. Right now, if you head over to IM Cardboard and wanted to buy just a standard color cardboard, they're about $7.99 minus that 10% discount that we shared at the beginning that you can get using the code irisvr.com. If you're interested in customizing them, they are able to provide discounts on bulk purchases, I believe starting anywhere at 50 or above. And once you get to a larger number, the price drops down to $4, $5, depending if you have multiple colors for the design, what size you're printing on. So it's really, in terms of a marketing tool, it's really great and very inexpensive to do. And, you know, it's really cool. Like, we've seen a lot of our customers, you know, keep the, you know, cardboards that are branded with the building or event that they went to as something, you know, they can share with their friends. So it's a great marketing tool, especially for any new building or getting your project, your client really excited about it. All right, I have another question here. This is from Jessica. Jessica says, have people used both desktop and mobile VR together in the same presentation? Yes, you can absolutely use both technologies together. This is one of the reasons why we created the Prospect 360 capture. If you are doing an interactive presentation with your client where you have them in Prospect, they're going around, they are making annotations, they are adjusting daylight conditions, you can quickly turn on the 360 capture tool, take an image of that, which will be produced in seconds, and that panorama will collect and will capture any annotations that they have made, any changes, any layers that have been turned on and off. And then afterwards, you can simply go ahead, upload those images onto a Pano as a record, onto Scope as a record of the meeting that you had with them, and share it with them, send them off with a cardboard, and you're good to go. That's one option, also because the experiences both for desktop and mobile VR are very different, both in terms of what you can do and what their appearance is. Mobile VR is very photorealistic, while desktop VR is not quite yet as realistic, as photorealistic as it is with scope. It's a very good way to have, scope represents and 360 captures what the final view might look like, but you can use the desktop VR with that live 3D model to talk about spatial constraints and evaluate different aspects of the model that you wouldn't quite be able to see with scope, and vice versa. Great. So I believe that is all the questions. If anyone else is interested in submitting one more question, please do so now. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap up our webinar. As I mentioned, at the end of this webinar, everyone that's registered will get a link to seeing this webinar, so you can always follow along on your own steps if you'd like to listen to anything else that I shared or any tips or tricks. As well, if you have any questions that occur to you that I might not have covered during our time, please send me an email to eileen@irisvr.com. I'm always available and always happy to answer any questions that I can in regards to workflows, which headset to pick, different ways of creating content and how to apply it for your projects. It's something that I love to do, and I'm always available for a quick chat. All right, thank you so much for participating in today's webinar, and please keep an eye on your inbox for all these details. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.